Exchange rates. The OECD defines an exchange rate as the price of one country's currency in relation to another. The two measures of relative exchange rates are to other individual currencies, also known as bilateral, for example the Australian dollar to the United States dollar, and the trade weighted index. The first measurement of relative exchange rates is other individual currencies. With this measurement, it's the price of one currency expressed in terms of another currency. It's also referred to as bilateral or cross rates. For example, today, one Australian dollar could buy 0.79 United States dollars. When quoting against individual currencies, we use the indirect method of quotation. That is, how many units of foreign currency can purchase 1 unit of domestic currency. On February 5, 2018, one Australian dollar bought 0.79 US dollars and 87 Japanese yen. The other measurement of relative exchange rates is trade weighted index, or TWI. This is not a price in terms of single foreign currency, but an indicator of movements in the average value of Australia's dollar against the currencies of our trading partners. The composition of the TWI basket is determined by relative share of different countries in Australia's trade, with weights reviewed annually. In December 2017, Australia's TWI composition was the Chinese 24%, Japanese 10%, and the US 10%. This reflected our trade with these countries. So, which measurement should we use and which one is better? Well, the answer is neither. Bilateral trade weights may not provide the best basis for assessing changes in a home country's competitiveness if there are other third countries with which the home country trades little, but with which it competes in terms of its export to international markets. While movements in a broad exchange rate indices like the TWI can sometimes mask important developments in individual bilateral rates or in groups of bilateral rates. The foreign exchange market. An exchange rate is a price, the price of one currency in terms of another. The price is determined in a market, the foreign exchange market. The market is a competitive market as there are no restrictions on who may trade. Demand for currency means they want to buy the currency. Supply of a currency means they want to sell the currency. The Australian dollar is the 5th most traded currency in the world, with $350 billion turnover a day. The Australian against the US is the 4th most traded currency pair. With any market, there is demand and supply. For this video, the market will be the Australian dollar from US dollars. Demand is when people plan to buy the currency. An increase in demand will shift the demand curve right from D1 to D2. This will increase the equilibrium price from, in this example, from 0.7 to 0.8. Factors which will increase demand for the Australian dollar are demand for Australian exports increases, the interest rate differential increases. Now this is a new term. Interest rate differential is a difference between two interest rates. For example, if Australia is 2.5% and Australia is 1.5%, the difference is 1%. So if the difference is greater in Australia, our investors can get a greater return in Australia, they will demand more Australian dollars. And the other thing is also expected future exchange rates. While a decrease in demand will shift the demand curve left from D1 to D3. This will decrease the equilibrium price from 0.7 to 0.6. Factors which will decrease demand for the Australian dollar are demand for Australian exports decreases, interest rate differential decreases, and expected future exchange rate decreases. Factors affecting supply of the Australian dollar. While supply is when people plan to sell the currency and they buy another. In this example, sell Australian dollars and buy US dollars. An increase in supply will shift the supply curve right from S1 to S2. In this example, it would decrease the equilibrium price from 0.7 to 0.6. Factors which will increase the supply of Australian dollars are Australian imports increase, the interest rate differential decreases, and expected future exchange rates decrease. While a decrease in supply will shift the supply curve left from S1 to S3. In this example, we will increase the equilibrium price from 0.7 to 0.8. Factors which will decrease supply of Australian items are Australian imports decreases, interest rate differential increases, and expected future rate will increase. There are two changes in exchange rates. A depreciation is when there is a loss in purchasing power and the exchange rate falls in value, i.e. the equilibrium price falls. While an appreciation is when there is a rise in the purchasing power as the exchange rate rises in value, i.e. the equilibrium price rises. These movements result in changes of the equilibrium rate. For example, in 2014, one Australian dollar bought 0.84 United States dollars. Then it could buy 0.93 US dollars. This was an appreciation of the dollar as the purchasing power increased. While in 2015, when one Australian dollar bought 0.93, then it could only buy 0.73. This was a depreciation of the dollar as the purchasing power decreased. Let's look at this in practice. Let's look how much one Australian dollar bought of US dollars over an 18-month period. We have an Apple Watch, which we buy in the US, which costs $399 US dollars. And let's assume it's the price for the whole time of 18 months. On the 24th of July 2014, one Australian dollar bought 0.9448 US dollars. So this Apple Watch cost 422 Australian dollars. 18 months later, on the 20th of January 2016, one Australian dollar bought only 0.6867 US dollars. So the Australian dollar depreciated against the US dollar. So the Apple Watch now cost me 581 Australian dollars. Therefore, the same watch at the same price in the US cost 37% more, or 159 more, over an 18-month period. This depreciation had reduced our purchasing power. Governments and central banks can have one of three policies towards the exchange rate systems. They can have a fixed. That is one that pegs the exchange rate at a value decided by the government or central bank, and that blocks the unregulated forces of demand and supply by direct intervention in the foreign exchange market. This system requires the central bank to hold large volumes of foreign reserves, i.e. other countries, to allow them to buy and sell, and this is expensive. However, it does allow the current certainty about the immediate short-term value, which assists imports and exports. Another system is a floating or flexible exchange rate. The exchange rate is determined by the forces of demand and supply. There is no direct intervention in the foreign exchange market by the central bank. This system allows a more realistic market price. It allows monetary policy to be more effective, and most of our trading partners use it. However, there is increased volatility, with the currency and the dollar is subject to sudden shifts. And finally, managed. This policy is one that selects a target of the exchange rate that changes periodically, with the intervention of foreign exchange markets to achieve their target. Let's look at these exchange rate policies diagrammatically. We will apply each policy in an Australian situation. First, we have flexible exchange rates, also known as a floating exchange rate. The exchange rate is determined by the forces of demand and supply of the Australian dollar. There is no direct intervention in the foreign exchange market by the central bank or government. For example, an increase in demand from an increase in Australian exports, or the Australian dollar is expected to increase in the future. So demand curve shifts right from D1 to D2, and the Australian dollar appreciates from 0.7 to 0.8, while an increase in supply from an increase in Australian imports, the Australian dollar is expected to decrease in the future. So the supply curve shifts right from S1 to S2, and the Australian dollar depreciates from 0.7 to 0.6. Next, we have a fixed exchange rate, which is one that pegs the exchange rate at a value decided by the government or central bank, and that blocks the unregulated forces of demand and supply by direct intervention in the foreign exchange market. So, let's say the central bank wants to appreciate the dollar. They would increase demand to buy more Australian dollars, and they, either central bank, would sell foreign exchange reserves. This would shift from D1 to D2 and appreciate from 0.7 to 0.8. While If the central bank wanted to depreciate the dollar, they would increase supply to sell more Australian dollars, and they would increase their foreign exchange reserves. So the supply curve would shift right from S1 to S2 and depreciate from 0.7, to 0.6. The fixed and flexible rates systems are two extremes. In the middle is a managed exchange rate system. This is the policy is one that selects a target for the managed exchange rate, and that changes periodically with the intervention of the foreign exchange market. For example, the Australian dollar to sit between 0.6 and 0.8 US dollars. If the dollar exceeds this target band, the central bank will intervene just like in the fixed exchange rate system, so by buying and selling foreign exchange reserves. Now, we can see on screen the three different systems diagrammatically. Hint, Year 12, take a screenshot. So, what system does Australia use? The RBA published a great summary on why does Australia have a floating exchange rate, and we have a floating exchange rate. They concluded, the floating exchange rate regime that has been in place since 1983 is widely accepted as having been beneficial for Australia. The floating exchange rate has provided a buffer against external shocks, particularly shifts in terms of trade, allowing the economy to absorb them without generating the large inflationary or deflationary pressures that tend to result under previous fixed exchange rate systems. It has also enabled the Reserve Bank to set monetary policy that is best suited to domestic conditions, rather than needing to meet a certain target for the exchange rate. On the right, the RBA has this great graph which shows interest rate volatility in blue on top and Australian dollar volatility in red. It can be seen that since 2008, there has been low volatility, around 4%. This is great for our economy because it shows our economy is stable and other countries want to invest with us. So, what influence does the Reserve Bank of Australia, RBA, Australia's central bank, have on exchange rate? The Reserve Bank of Australia does not have a target rate for Australia's currency. However, they have intervened in the market when volatility was excessive. The RBA intervenes by creating demand or supply of the Australian dollar by buying or selling Australian dollars against another currency, usually the US dollar. However, inherently, it is difficult to quantify the effect of intervention transaction on the exchange rate. Here we have a graph from the RBA on foreign exchange intervention from 1989 against the US dollar. A positive sign indicates a purchase of foreign exchange, while a negative value indicates a sale of foreign exchange. For example, during the GFC in 2007 and October 2008, the RBA intervened significantly. The RBA stated interventions were designed to improve liquidity in the market and thereby limit disruptive price adjustments. So, what are the effects of fluctuation in exchange rates on the Australian economy? Let's have a look at an appreciation. The positive effects are Australia's consumers have increased purchasing power, i.e. they can imports are now cheaper. There are decreased servicing costs on debt, so interest rate repayments are cheaper. This decreases the debit in the net primary income, which reduces our CAD and the balance of payments. It reduces the value of our foreign debt, the valuation effect, and inflationary pressures are reduced because imports are cheaper and the cost of living has gone down. However, the negative effects are exports are more expensive in the world market, therefore these businesses struggle and unemployment may affect those industries. In the medium term, decreased exports is going to reduce the credit and the trade balance and increase the CAD and the balance of payments. There will be higher import spending, which reduces export revenue in Australia, and that would decrease our economic growth. And there will be reduction value of foreign income earned in Australia's investment, decrease in credit and net primary income, and increase the CAD and the balance of payments. And our value of our foreign assets will decrease because of the valuation effect. So, to conclude, an exchange rate is the price of one country's currency in relation to another. The two measures of relative exchange rates are to other individual currencies or bilateral, i.e. one Australian dollar bought 0.7929 US dollars, and the trade weight index, currencies of our trading partners.